This is Gail. Welcome tonight to Overcoming the Obstacles. It's Sunday night, so that means we are doing our Bible study discussion. And I am joined again by Stellar Piper. She's going to be a regular here with me on Sunday night. So, yay, Stellar Piper. Stellar Piper went to seminary. I'm a former pastor. So, we thought we would combine our combined brain cells and see about leading this discussion tonight. Now, it is a discussion, so put your comments over here in the chat and we'll be responding to those as we go through. So, comments, suggestions, questions, prayer concerns, prayer requests, drop them over there, okay? And when we do our prayer tonight, we are going to want to remember those who have been struck by violence with the shootings and so forth, and the storms. Several people have asked about my neck of the woods here in Southwest Virginia, and we are fine. We do butt up against Tennessee just a little bit, but that area of the state is all good. Few trees down here and there, but literally no big deal. Our power didn't even flash. I mean, totally fine. So thank you all. I believe Stellar Piper, your area up in Kentucky was good too.
Yeah, we're all good here.
So thank you all, though, very much for your concern and your messages and your tweets and your text messages. We appreciate that. So anyway, are we ready to get started? Yeah, this is an interesting story, I think. So what we're looking at tonight is the sinful woman. Some of you will recognize it as the story of the alabaster box. We've got some discussion questions. Those discussion questions are linked down there in the description box. It's a bit.ly link. You may have to click show more to get it to pop up, but it's down there, I promise. And when that file opens, it's a Google Drive file. So just scrolling down to the part about the sinful woman or the woman with the alabaster box, because that's what we're talking about tonight. Whew, I'm trying so hard not to cough. Oh, I may pop out of here in a minute and let Stellar Piper talk to you while I go get a drink. But anyway, also in the description box is a link for the scripture. And we are looking at Luke chapter 7. Actually, it's not in here, but it will be in just a minute. Chapter 7, verses 36 to 50. It is now in the description box. I put a link to the NIV, but please feel free. Use whatever you would like, okay? Because the purpose is not to have any particular version of the Bible. Just follow along with what you like. I know Stellar Piper is probably going to use a different version. Let's see. What do you like?
No, it's NIV tonight.
Oh, it is NIV? Well, what do I know? Last week it was a different version. It was CEB. So we're bopping around. There's no telling. So, but this is one of those stories that almost takes place within a story, what the Bible likes to do to us, because Jesus was really good at that. And so that's part of what this is. So if you hear us talk about Simon along with the part of the sinful woman, don't let that fool you. Okay? He's probably going to be mentioned too.
Yep.
Okay. So actually, I am going to step off. Stellar Piper, if you don't mind, go ahead and start reading, and I'm going to go grab my drink. It should just take me a second to go get it.
All righty.
Okay. See you in about an hour.
What? All right. Reading from Luke chapter 7. Starting in 36. Now one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, so he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. When a woman who had lived a sinful life in that town learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, she brought an alabaster jar of perfume, and as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. Two men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii, and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he canceled the debts of both. Now which of them will love him more?" Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt canceled." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time that I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. But he who has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." And that ends chapter 7.
Wow. So, okay. Wow. So she goes in. So kind of to understand this a little more, the Pharisees are. Who are the Pharisees, Stellar?
They're basically they're the clergy of the day, the religious leaders.
Kind of the upper crust of society.
Very much so.
They're the decision makers, your higher up government types. And in we have entering this woman after Jesus has been invited. A woman there learned that he was eating at the Pharisee's house. This woman was so gutsy. We're looking at a lot of women of the Bible. This woman is really, really gutsy. If it was the head of our church, we're familiar with the United Methodist Church, and there is a hierarchy in our United Methodist Church where we have like licensed local pastors, and then we have elders who have been to seminary and do lots of continuing education and have lots of requirements. Along with that, we have district superintendents, and then we have bishops, and then we have those who are like on a global scale. That's just like our small little area. If I knew that somebody was having dinner at like the bishop's house, I don't know that I would invite myself there. How about you, Stellar?
Oh yeah, she was gutsy for sure. It's also really interesting to note that in the first century when this was written, hospitality was huge, and there were certain rules of hospitality that hosts had to follow. One of them was giving water for guests to wash their feet, because when you're wearing sandals all the time and you're walking in dusty roads, your feet get gross. So even though this Pharisee invited Jesus over, he wasn't following all the rules that a host should. We can see that in verse 44 and 44 through 46, where he basically calls out the host for not following the rules of hospitality. So the woman was a better host than the Pharisee, even though she wasn't even invited in the first place.
So he invited Jesus, but obviously he had some issues with inviting Jesus. So I didn't really catch it like that. But it makes sense. Also, hospitality at this time period made a difference in life and death for somebody, because you're out in the desert and you needed to, be able to refresh yourself, get something to drink, get something to eat, and so forth. So, and I also think too that the woman is pretty brave and gutsy to go up to the guest of honor, whether he was really intended to be, you know, whether he was invited out of the right spirit or not, to just go up to the guest of honor and just lay yourself out before him and start wiping his feet with her hair. So let's look at the discussion questions here. The first one, and again, these are linked down below. What can we learn from the woman's act of humility and service to Jesus, and how can we apply this to our own life? Wow. Well, she didn't approach him as someone who was on equal par with everybody else. She came forward very humbly, but yet boldly.
Yeah, I think you're right. She definitely had a humble boldness.
And I wonder if that kind of stems from also some desperation, because desperate people do desperate things. And I think that when you're acting from a point of desperation, it can make you braver.
Mhm.
But she was definitely moved. I mean, she stood behind this passage 38, verse 38 says, as she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair and kissed them and poured the perfume on him. So she's very, very humble, but yet bold, but yet she's crying.
And how hard do you have to cry to be able to wet somebody's feet with your tears?
Right? She's showing her love for him right here.
And for sure, the perfume, the alabaster jar of perfume, that was not cheap.
Well, alabaster itself is a jar that, or a mineral rather, that is typically carved. It's a mineral or rock. It's soft. It's used for carving. It can be processed to make like plaster powder, but archaeologists in the stone processing industry use the word a little differently from geologists. The former used it in the wider sense that includes a variety of minerals, but ancient alabaster at this time is a type of calcite, and it's carved. So the fact that she's using alabaster can indicate that it was expensive in its own right, that it may have had carvings and intricate designs on it and so forth that would have even made the box valuable, in addition to the contents of the box being valuable with the perfume. So, the Pharisee kind of blows my mind here, because it says when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who's touching him and what kind of woman she is. She's a sinner. So even his inner thoughts about Jesus aren't positive.
I kind of wonder if the Pharisee actually intended this to be one of the situations where they try to catch Jesus out.
Could be.
Because he invited him, but didn't do any of the hospitality things. He let a woman who he knew full well is a sinner. He had to have at least let her stay. Because wouldn't you ask somebody to leave if they snuck in without being invited?
Good possibility. I would think so. But they've tried to do this with women in Jesus and try to catch him in all kinds of little situations where he either couldn't explain himself or wouldn't explain himself. And time after time after time, that backfired.
I think this is one of those times.
And this may be, you may be right. So, but that does say a lot about his inner thoughts. And, the woman could have been just mind blown by being allowed to be in addition to being in the presence of Jesus. I think one of the like going back to the question here, what can we learn from her act of humility and service, and how can we apply this to our own lives? I think we can. What I get out of it is that we can approach things boldly, but to also be humble about it. She could have gone in going, "Oh, I'm here to see Jesus. I have got this alabaster box and I have brought this perfume and I am going to pour it on his feet because you didn't do your basic hospitality rules. So here I am to save you." And she didn't. She very humbly, very meekly went in, but yet boldly. So I think for me, to learn to be more bold and a little more humble. What do you think, Stellar?
For sure.
And what do you all think? Go ahead and drop your comments down there, and we will, we'll talk about them. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't subscribed yet, now is a really good time to do that. And don't forget to give me a like on the live stream, please. Stellar and I both would appreciate that. So look at your big smile there. So yay. All right. So question 2 is, how does the woman's act of humility and selflessness inspire us to serve and honor God in our own lives? Wow, that's a tough question. That's a tough question. And I tell you what, I'm going to show these on the screen too as we come to them. I'm just going to put the first one up here. So that was the first question right there. And then I'm going to go ahead and type in the second one, which is, how does the woman's act of humility and selflessness inspire us to serve and honor God in our own lives? I'm going to go back to it. For me to be bolder, I think about my faith. That's my takeaway, I think. Okay.
Yeah, I agree. But also,
okay, here we go. Go ahead.
I kind of feel like there's something in there about giving our best gifts to God.
Okay.
How
do you mean by that?
Because
are we talking financially, emotionally, both?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't hide your light under a bushel, but also using whatever gifts you have extravagantly for God. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense.
Okay.
Because her pouring perfume on Jesus' feet was not I'm just going to use a little of this for Jesus and that's all he needs. That was more than what was needed, probably.
It was an act of worship. I mean, she didn't have to give everything that she had in that box, because this would have been something very expensive. And she didn't have to give everything for Jesus. And she didn't have to risk going to the Pharisees. She didn't have to risk being allowed in the door. She just didn't have to. But she did.
For me, I don't know, I'm kind of stumbling around in the dark here. There's also a sense of don't be afraid to try.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah. And that's what I think a lot of our hangups are as people in general, is we become afraid of trying, especially when if you're coming from especially if you come from a background where you've had people make fun of you or tell you that you're less than. It's hard to come forward with that. I keep going back to the word boldness, or that confidence, or to even think about wanting to try. And here this woman did, and she was very, I think, rewarded for it. I
Yeah.
mean, we're still talking about her 2,000 years later, plus. We're still talking about her heroic act of worship. Pretty inspiring to me. Um, okay. Did you have anything else you wanted to say on that, Stellar?
No, not on that. I'm sure I'll have something to say about something else, but not on that.
That's why you're here. All right. So the next question that's on our list, and again, all the questions are linked in the description box. There's a bit.ly link, bit.ly, and that's the link that you're going to push to see all of the questions, although I am trying to put them on the screen. In case I miss one, you know where to go. Or in case you want to look at them later, there they are. And you will have to scroll down to the portion about the sinful woman, the woman with the alabaster box, to get it. But, okay. So this next question, why do you think Simon the Pharisee was so judgmental of the woman's actions?
Part of it had to be just basically elitist classism, because the Pharisees were at the top of the social totem pole, but as a woman, and even more as a sinful woman, she would have been near the bottom of the pack.
Absolutely. And she, as a sinful woman, she certainly would not have had the type of clothes that you would have expected people to wear to show up to an occasion like this.
Mm-hmm.
So she wouldn't have had the same clothes. She wouldn't have had the same understanding of social norms. That because that's going to be different, right? So we've got some classism there. We've got some devaluation of women, and all kinds of things going on here. But Jesus looked right past that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that may have made Simon a little bit more scornful too, when he saw that his guest of honor was willing to accept the presence of this woman who just came in off the street and wasn't even invited, but yet there she is, and she's talking to the guest of honor, and this is what she's doing, and I can just imagine things like that running through his head. I mean, so yeah.
Looking in verse,
What? What?
looking in verse 43, after Jesus talks about the money lender forgiving the debts of the people, Simon replies that the one who had the bigger debt canceled would be more grateful. I kind of feel like that's Simon being a little bit huffy, if that makes sense.
Okay. I see where you're going there. I can see that.
And just not generally very pleased with the situation. Now, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, and see that kind of segues into Jesus kind of turning the situation around and shifting the focus from the woman with the alabaster box back to Simon, and saying, but she did this and you wouldn't. So lots of judgment there and against her. Also, the second portion of this says, in what ways do we sometimes fall into the trap of judging others based on their past mistakes? For me, I can only answer for me. Y'all have to answer for yourselves. But with me, I tend not to judge people on their past mistakes. Decades ago, I worked with juvenile offenders, and I'm like, whatever you did in the past that led you to my path doesn't matter to me. I don't know. I don't want to say I don't care, because they had to work out their time with us, as a host site for juvenile offenders, kind of based on what they did. But my point I was trying to make with them, that I'm phrasing really, really badly right now, is that our experience together began when they came in the door and introduced themselves to me, and I introduced myself to them. That's where our point started. Anything that happened in their life before that wasn't going to influence how I treated them at that moment going forward. A little bit more of a beyond, if you're nice to me, I'll be nice to you, but a more of a respect thing and more of an acceptance thing. Because I already knew when they came in the door that they had been through some bad things and had done some bad things, but that didn't mean they were a bad person. So I try not to judge others based on their past mistakes.
One thing I learned working at Arbor, we all tried to operate from what's called a trauma-informed care perspective. So basically, instead of leading with the question, what is wrong with you? We lead with the question, what have you been through? And how does that influence how you're acting right now? So that paradigm shift was a challenge, but ultimately super helpful.
I like that. Mm-hmm. Kind of affirming. I remember getting so mad one day. I was working with a survivor of domestic violence, and the woman was trying to tell me that her therapist was telling her that she didn't have a good sense of self-esteem. And I had heard variations of this so many times, and it really was frustrating to me, because a woman who leaves an abusive spouse to get her life and claim it again as her own has got tons of self-esteem. And finally, she gets to the point where she gathers the self-esteem and is able to do that. And it makes me deeply upset for them when somebody says you don't have self-esteem. If you didn't have self-esteem, you wouldn't have been able to walk out and move forward and try to claim your amazing life that's ahead of you.
So, I've got a story.
Is it one that can be shared online? Because if it's not, you can't say it. Okay, so yeah, moving on.
It's safe.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
One of my kids had done some really questionable things, and he was a Christian. So he came to me one day and he said that he didn't know how God could love him given what he'd done. And I just looked at him and was like, oh, sweetie, God still loves you.
I've been asked that question several times too. God's love for us doesn't change. I think our love for him can change, both up and down. But he created us. He knows us. He can handle our feelings, our thoughts, our mistakes, our achievements. He can handle us. So, yeah.
And we see that in verse 47. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much.
Wow. This puts it, therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown.
Oh, that's cool.
But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. And then he turns to her and says, your sins are forgiven. So, and that kind of seems to have set aside a little little miniature earthquake going on there, because the next thing is, and the other guests began to say among themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" You know, so I can just hear this, because beginning to say among themselves means they're talking about him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this is not an E.F. Hutton moment. That commercial may be beyond your
A little bit,
know.
but I get the reference.
Back in the day, there was this commercial, and it was when E.F. Hutton talks, and the room totally is silent. People listen. So this was not an E.F. Hutton moment for Jesus. Wow. Okay. So our next question is wait a minute. How does the story of the sinful woman demonstrate the transformative power of Christ's love? And what are some examples when you have experienced this power in your life? And again, I'm going to put that up here. So, how does the story of the sinful woman demonstrate the transformative power of Christ's love? Well, for one thing, he treated her as an equal for the most part, except there is one part where he actually, I think, kind of put her above Simon, who had invited him. And that's the part where he says, "You didn't give me any water. She is creating her own water. She is wiping my feet with her tears and her hair, and you wouldn't even give me any water." So I think at that point, he kind of elevated her just a little bit, which had to have just rankled Simon to bits.
I also really wish we had a 6 months later in Luke 7 bit.
Yes.
So we could just catch up with her a little bit.
Like a to be continued.
Mm-hmm. This feels like a little bit like a cliffhanger as far as she's concerned.
Okay. And then the other half of it, what are some times when you've experienced this transformative power in your own life? I can think of a few times. How about you?
I can think of a few. I just don't think any of them are good for internet sharing.
Well, I know that. Okay, I will. I'm going to share a moment from your life that I think was transformative. Okay.
Go for it.
All right. So, you all who don't know, Stellar over here, she has epilepsy. And she's going to be mad at me for saying this. I hope not, but you might be. But like back in middle school, she had this physician who said she was never going to be able to achieve in music or math because of the type of epilepsy that she had, and to just, be nice and kind of encourage her a little bit with the music, but don't really expect things out of her. Well, don't ever tell a mama that. Just don't. And if you're a doctor and you're listening, do not tell your patients that. Okay, you can tell them it may be hard. They may have to dig a little deeper. I don't care how you want to phrase it, but don't just flat say you're not going to be able to achieve in music and math, because they may have this transformative experience where later in life they go and they play at the National Cathedral. This person who is not going to achieve in math or music gets a solo at the National Cathedral.
That was fun.
How's that? Is that transformative?
Yeah, it was. I just had completely
Because, like, who but God is going to move you from where the doctor expected you to be to where you actually wound up?
Another bit of irony. A large part of what I'm doing for a living now is math.
Okay, there you go. And you did well enough at math that you were able to help me with it to get caught up in college. Y'all, I have dyscalculia, and one of the transformative things in my life was finding that out. I didn't know as a kid. I always thought I was stupid when it came to math, and like so did the rest of my family, and they told me that plenty of times. And in college, I was having trouble passing math to get up to the college level math, right? So I'm like, I'm so upset. And the woman at Disability Services, because I had this head injury thing going on. So I was under the care of Disability Services. And she's like, "What? Have you been tested?" And I'm like, "What? No." And she's like, let's just set you up, get you tested, and take it from there. So I'm like, okay. So I went and I had the testing done. And they're like, you're not very good at math. And I'm like, oh, honey, no, I know that. And they're like, yeah, well, you're not good at math because you have a math learning disability. And if you use colored pencils and graph paper, it might just help you. Which is great, except I didn't know the concepts of what I was working on because I'd like shut my brain down in math class and I don't retain things and blah, 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 blah. So Stellar Piper over here, who was not going to be good at math, was actually able to help me pass. And I passed nicely with your help and the colored pencils and the graph paper.
You just needed the tools.
Yay. Did what?
You just needed the tools.
And, I will say too, talking about the Sinful Woman, that boldness to be able to go into the disability services and say, I need some help. That was not really easy. But now I would go back in a heartbeat. So, yeah, that would be one of the times when that transformative power of Jesus kicked in. Because, when you go to college, some people just don't take time for you. It doesn't matter if you're helping to write their paycheck. It's like everything else. They have time or they don't have time. And they care or they don't. And this woman was a godsend, this whole department. So, okay. Moving right along. Here's our next one. What are some practical steps that we can take to embody forgiveness and love in our daily lives to ourselves and then to others? Cricket.
I really think coming back to Arbor, I really think one of the ways is to make that shift from what is wrong with you to what have you been through. Because it automatically puts you in a less judgy mindset.
So you think just basically changing how you're looking at things is a practical step that we can embody forgiveness to others?
Yes. Does that make sense?
Okay. What about steps we can take to embody the forgiveness and love in our daily lives for ourselves? Like, how do we claim that as our own? I think maybe just being nice to ourselves. And this woman, one takeaway that I get out of her story is she could have let anybody talk her out of doing this. And she didn't, because she had that conviction that this is what she needed to do. And although certainly the Pharisee did not look at her in any kind of acceptance, she went anyway. And she didn't know how Jesus was going to receive her. But she went anyway. And I think that telling ourselves that we're worthy to try an experience, as an experience that's going to help us and not at the detriment of other people. I think telling ourselves that we're worthy of trying that experience is a big thing. And just kind of being nicer to ourselves, cutting ourselves some slack.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah. And we can do that for others too. That's my thought.
I feel like
And
in
it
a lot
kind
of
of
ways
echoes
it's
what you were
easier.
saying too. Hmm?
I feel like in a lot of ways it's easier to do for others than ourselves.
I think so. I think so. But, I think we need to start being nicer to ourselves, especially as women, because this is a male dominated patriarchal society, and that is just the way it is. And I think we have to be nice to ourselves to make it.
Yeah, for sure.
You know. So, all right. This next question is about the same as what we just had. Same answers anyway. And that is, how can we apply the lessons from this story to our own personal and spiritual growth? And how can we encourage others to do the same? So I think reading it and rereading it and, reminding, I'm going to say kind of what I just said, reminding ourselves that we're worthy of, positive experiences and to encourage other people, to tell themselves that they're worthy. And what do you think?
All of that, but also to not let fear stop us from doing whatever we feel like we need to do.
Good point. I actually, on my video that I did on my other channel about travel with asthma, a woman's question that prompted that whole video was based on her being afraid to travel because she's got asthma. So, one of the things that I said in the video is don't let that stop you. Don't be so afraid of life that you don't do something that you want to do.
Don't let life get in the way of living.
That would be it. For those of you who are not familiar with my other channel, it is Be Bodacious. And the reason I call it Be Bodacious is the tagline is Be Bodacious, don't let life get in the way of living. And that's, to me, that's huge. It's huge enough that I named my channel after it. So, yep. So, all right. What else do you want to say, Stellar? Okay, you got it.
I'm good.
All right.
I have run out of things to say.
Okay. Well, y'all, thank you so much for tuning in and being part of our show, part of our discussion tonight. When you come back, don't forget to like the video and share it and leave your prayer requests because we do pray for you. And don't hesitate to walk out on boldness and to tell yourself that you are worthy because that's the truth. You are worthy. So we're going to close. Let me go through our prayer requests right quick. Give me just a second to pull them up. Just a second. Stellar, say something.
Something. Hi.
Something. Okay. I'm just checking. Okay. Well, I don't see it, but I want to always, when we're going to pray, I want to make sure that I mention my moderators, my friends, my supporters, my whole troop, posse, village. Y'all are awesome. So I pray for you all every day. I pray for my moderators every day and for my family and friends. You all are always covered. Also, we have had some requests for somebody who's having problems with her son. We're going to pray for her. We've also got somebody who's having problems with her daughter. So we're going to pray for her. We're just going to pray for parents, victims of violence and victims of storms. And we're going to pray for the channel too. You want to pray?
Sure.
Okay.
Gracious and holy God, thank you for the opportunity to come together and dig into your word. Be with us as we depart from this virtual space, and especially be with those prayer requests that we have lifted and those we hold in the silence of our hearts. Guide us always and bring us back together. In Jesus' name, amen.
So thank you all. Thank you, Stellar Piper, for coming out. And we will see you all next Sunday, right here, 8 p.m. Thanks for coming. See you next time. Bye.